today we're hanging out with my friend Bryan Beller. Bryan, thank you so much for having us.
You're very, very welcome, and thank you for having me.
Yes. So here at Groovy Moody Music TV, we talk about the moment of inspiration, moment of creation, and everyone has a process, of course, so we try to interview different musicians and see what their process is all about. So hopefully we can learn something from it and to hopefully inspire some newer musicians. So the moment of creation and the moment of inspiration, what does that mean for you? What is your process?
Well, it's interesting. There's a long time where I kind of felt like I wasn't really capable of writing music, and then suddenly a melody appeared in my head, and I was just like, where'd that come from? I wasn't really thinking about it at all. But I think now that I've released 3 albums on my own, and I've written some additional music for the Aristocats albums, I think the way it usually shows up is when I'm calm and still. It's not, if I'm like busy doing a bunch of stuff, it's not like suddenly I hear music in my head. But if I'm hiking, or if I'm doing something that's kind of like a repetitive thing, and I get into some kind of like trance thing where I let my brain kind of shut into a kind of neutral state, then something will kind of show up. And what I've learned is that when a melody or a groove or an idea shows up, immediately grab the phone and sing it into your voice memo. Yes. Do not wait. Do not wait 5 seconds. Just get it immediately, because the second that you say, oh, I remember this, I'm going to do it when I get home, that idea will be gone. Totally. At least for me anyway. So that's happened to me in a few different ways. I know, like my album Scenes from the Flood, which is this big double album progressive concept thing. I used to go hiking a lot, and things would just come to me almost invariably at like the 20th or 30th minute of the hike. Once I was out there and I got my rhythm, and I kind of was in the flow of it, not thinking about anything really, just hiking. Suddenly I'd get an idea, or I'd get an idea for an arrangement, or a completely original idea for a new song, and then I would sing it into my voice memo. A couple of other times, I've woken up from a sleep and had something immediately upon waking. That's a weird thing, because that's like purely subconscious, right? To wake up and like hear a complete song. That happened with a song called Smuggler's Corridor, which is an Aristocrat song from a few years ago. Ended up being one of the songs that we closed the show with. A song called Flatlands, which is a ballad that was like that. And a few songs from Scenes in the Flood were like that for me too. And then there's just kind of the random factor where I would, obviously not when I'm running around and completely focused on doing something else, but sometimes something would just show up. After a while, I kind of learned to not really think too much about the creative process and just kind of let it occur. But then when it did, if something showed up, to capture it, as quickly as possible in voice memo. It's funny, I go back and I listen to sometimes the voice memos of the songs that these eventually became. I'll go back and listen to the voice memo. It's remarkably similar what the song ended up being. Like it was really there right in the moment where I first thought of it. And the rest was just mechanics.
Yeah. So
if you can get into a state like that where you trust your first creative instinct, you just capture it and sing it to the best of your ability and your whatever how you ever can capture it. There's a good chance that, at least in my experience, it'll end up coming to fruition the way that you heard it if you just give it enough hours eventually.
Nice.
And then the other thing is, sometimes I want to tell a story with a certain vibe. And with the way I write songs is I tend to come up with the song title first. I know what I'm trying to say. And it's instrumental music 99.9% of the time. So I know what I'm trying to say. But I only get one opportunity to kind of describe it to the listener in language, and that's the title. And when I come up with a title, that usually, the vibe that's underneath it is just there. It'll arise inside the context of that title and the world of emotional content that I was associating with the vibe when I thought of the title. And then I can write inside the title, and ideas will kind of start kind of popping up little by little once I say, oh, it's called this. As opposed to just coming up with ideas that are just kind of a random jumble and then demoing them out and being like, oh, well, a song needs a title. I'm going to call it Peanut Butter and Jelly because I was having a peanut butter and jelly sandwich when I was recording it on the third. I think that's kind of bullshit. I feel like a song should have a title and language should mean something. So I put that in the front of the process almost always.
Okay.
And then it makes it easier to come up with something.
Nice. So that moment of inspiration when you actually get an idea, it seems like to me, for most of us, is when our minds are quiet, when we're not really thinking about it. It just sort of channels through us. Is that
it could be either way. Sometimes something will show up like that, but other times I will have some kind of lived experience that can be summarized in a pithy phrase. And then when the pithy phrase comes to me, I know it's a song title. And then when I know I have a song title, suddenly music starts showing up inside of that song title. So that's kind of the opposite in a way of the process that you were just describing, like you're just still and then creativity shows up. But it's all paradox in the end, right? Because what's showing, if you come up with a title and then, suddenly music shows up, it's not like it's just like you're sitting there diagramming it like a math equation. There is a moment at which something shows up. It wasn't there before, and then suddenly it's there.
Right.
So.
Yeah, well, the music comes out because of our influences, because of what we do, because of all the stuff that we play, and eventually we start hearing music in our head.
Yeah, I find that I really want to tell stories, almost always, when it comes to actual composition. I'm focused on a particular vibe, emotion, an experience, a story, something that really happened. Some general phenomena that occurs to humanity. These are the things that make me want to write music. And, it sounds like really deep and philosophical and kind of highfalutin, but it can be something really absurd, which is what I end up writing for the Aristocats a lot, is like just weird, funny shit, and then there's sometimes the specific instance of something that happened is only kind of like one example of a larger phenomena that a lot of people can relate to, something, again, funny and absurd. And then that can go the other way, where if you have something that is really deep and serious, or, sad or troubling or charged, then it can be that way too. And you can go in all the way into that world of emotion, trying to tell that kind of a story. But in the end, I really am usually trying to tell some kind of specific story. And then I try and let the music inform that, rather than just coming up with random ideas for music and then trying to figure out what it means later.
No.
Now, that's just how my brain works.
Yeah.
I'm a bit involuntarily intentional when it comes to compositions, but that's because that's the way I am about most things.
Yeah. But the musical idea, or the basic musical idea comes to you, and you already hear, when you hear it, you know how to play it, you know how to translate it into recording and all that stuff. So it's not like you're laboring over a certain thing, or you're trying to change the way you heard it. Maybe it's not 6-bar phrase, maybe it's an 8-bar phrase.
Sometimes that's true and sometimes that's not. Sometimes I'll like a good example is like this song for an upcoming Aristocrats album. I can't say it yet, but it was when I demoed it, when I sung it into the voice memo, it was a 6-phrase motif. And then when I sat down and demo it, I realized that it really only wanted to be 5 phrases.
Okay.
Other times, if I think of something very complex, and that happens every once in a while, not every note can be completely planned out in the idea. And so sometimes I'll sing something that most of it's there, but then some of it is just kind of garbagey. And then I have to sit down and actually execute what it was, that I was hearing, and then finish the idea so that it actually becomes reality on a fretboard, or reality on a keyboard. So it can go that way also. But then sometimes I'll hear, like, there's a song called As Advertised on Scenes from the Flood, my last solo album. And I remember I heard this melody. I heard it was in this key, and I heard da ba da 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 ba da 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 ba ba. I was like, and it just showed up completely like that. And so I sung it into my voice memo like that. And then a couple days later, I think it was not more than a couple days later, I was out hiking, kind of thinking about that song, and then I heard this other thing. I heard ba da 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 ba da ba da da. And I thought, okay, well, that's another song. And so I just sang it into my voice memo. And it wasn't until like about a week or two later when I went to, sit down and actually try and execute these things where I was like, that's not two songs, that's one song. That's two things that can occur at the same time in the same key at the same tempo.
So it's an A and B melody.
It was, yeah. And at first, it's when you could think of it as like A would happen, then B would happen. What eventually happened is that A and B could happen together.
Yeah.
And when that moment, of course, I didn't conceive of it as I'm going to think of two melodies that can occur simultaneously in the same key with the same kind of thing. I didn't think that way at all. It was unconscious or subconscious that I thought of those two melodies and that they actually belonged together, not just in the same song, but on top of each other.
Wow, that's cool. Definitely a lot of great moments in the stuff that you've written, a lot of great players also on those records.
Sweetheart.
We'll have some links for our viewers later so they can find that stuff.
On the internet.
On the internet and everywhere else.